The decision for import duty this time around by the cabinet has been deferred. Let's get straight in an expert on board. We've got with us Mr. Unnikrishnan, who joins in, Mr. M.S. Unnikrishnan, the Managing Director of Thermax. Mr. Unnikrishnan, thanks very much for joining in. Now that the decision has been deferred this time around, if you could just tell us your reaction. Was it on expected lines, or did you think that it would actually go underway this time around?
If you ask me, we as an industry are disappointed. Because it's a planning commission member, Mr. N. Myra, who was calculated and found out that there is not a level playing field available for Indian manufacturers, and Indian capacity is already in place. BHL is in place, Larsen Chubro is in place, and Thermax's capacity is coming on floor by September in the current year. So we were expecting the government will have to be giving us an equal playing field in comparison to Chinese. In fact, China has recently stipulated a rule that all the government projects for China have got to go to only Chinese companies, whether for power equipment or for anything. So every other country in the world is supporting their industry. We would have expected the government of India to be supporting Indian industry. It's a disappointment for us. So we will certainly, they have not cancelled it, they only deferred it. So I'm sure they may want to have some clarification sought, and we would certainly expect the government to be supporting the Indian industry.
Okay, so this is just a deferment, as you're saying, Mr. Unnikrishnan, but we will be expecting a final decision probably sometime. Would you have any sort of clarity that what is the timeline that we are working with? By when can we expect this to come up, especially given that we've got the budget that's going to be underway in just about 2 weeks' time as well?
I would expect it to be taken up in the budget also, if not so immediately after the budget, because in any case, if we're at, the government is bereft of money and they are wanting to have a mop-up of taxation done. There's one more way by which you would have reduced the tax leakage. Because when you say that for ultra-mega power plants and the mega power plants, there is no imposition or duty in the country, duty-free import, that means you're allowing something to come to the duty without income going to the sovereign. So I'm sure the government will be reconsidering that, in view of the fact that they have to be having a duty imposed to also mop up income for the government, plus also support the domestic industry. So timing I cannot predict, because ultimately it is going to be decided by the government only. I would prefer that it be done as a part of the budget, if not so immediately after that.
Sure. Mr. Unnikrishnan, although there has been no official word on the quantum of the duty hike this time around, speculations are fairly rife that the government would slap up to 19% levy on imported power equipment. Is that also a percentage and a figure that you were also working with in the industry?
We were expecting it to be 14% as a duty, plus countervailing duty to offset for the excise duty. There are the numbers which are floating around, because none of us are privy to what the government was discussing in the cabinet. But certainly, people were talking about 19%. That's the kind of thing newspaper reports I've read about, which is okay. At least to have imposition. It's not an imposition of a duty. It's a whatever is withdrawn earlier by the government as a concession is getting reinstatement, which is quite okay. That's the number to start with.
And Mr. Unnikrishnan, say the import duty is put in place, what happens then if Chinese players set up base here? Because a case in point, Dofang, which is one of China's largest BTG player, has indicated that it will perhaps set up base here in order to counter the duty structure. Because they believe, as they believe that there is enough order for Chinese equipment in India, what would this do?
Well, certainly we'll welcome it, because it's an investment into the country, creation of jobs in the country. So as an Indian, I would say that there is nothing wrong in anybody coming and investing in India and creating a base and supplying to India, because it creates a job for the country. But I'm certainly against allowing free import of such heavy equipment from countries, giving our employment to some other country.
Right. Mr. Unnikrishnan, so the base question really comes to, that it boils down to is about creating a level playing field between between companies that are operating domestically as well as, the globally competitive companies that we have in existence right now. But do you think this 19% sort of a duty would be enough to create a level playing field? Or do you think that you would probably need a slightly higher duty to actually bridge that price differential? And if this is done, 19% does come through, would that be enough to kind of moderate the demand or to actually create demand from the Indian suppliers?
At least with that kind of a duty level, the gap between import from other countries and the local manufactured products will be sufficiently close enough for an Indian power developer to offer an Indian company. Because nobody will go for a delta of maybe a 5 or 6% or a 10% to import from somewhere abroad, unless they have a huge advantage. So the 19% will bridge the gap, and then we are going to work to bring in efficiencies. So that is a duty, that's certainly, I would say, fundamental requirement of Indian companies to improve their efficiency and their knowledge capability, so that you compensate with that also. And one more thing, Indian domestic manufacturers will give continued support of service, which is a must for a very large capital equipment like a power plant. So that is another advantage available. So apart from the duty, there will be further delta build-up, which will be done by the Indian companies in terms of services. So with that, you will be able to motivate an Indian power developer to buy from Indian companies.
Mr. Unnikrishnan, another point that I wanted to bring to your notice is that the government has still not implemented the import duty on Chinese equipment, and you've also always indicated to make it a level playing field. But even when the duty that the street believes that Chinese equipments will be cheaper and that the demand for Chinese equipment is still abundant, how do you expect to take back that market share in this kind of a scenario then?
Are you talking about if they don't impose the duty or after they imposing the duty?
That's right.
After imposing the duty, certainly, I'm sure there will be enough and more avenues available for the new orders going to be finalized, where we should be able to give a price also compatible to the Indian market. Because frankly speaking, if you looked at the way the prices are going in the market for power equipment, Indian manufacturers have been able to bring down their costs at least by 15 to 20%. That's already done by the Indian companies. That's the innovation done by the Indian companies. The capabilities built up by the Indian companies. So with that, we should be able to. And in any case, the quality of equipment manufactured in India will be far ahead of what you will get in any other part of the world, barring Europe and America. So with that, there is a quality difference, there is a price bridge gap available, and a service also facility available of the Indian companies put together, which will make the Indian developers look at all of us much more favorably than what they were looking at earlier.
Right, Mr. Unnikrishnan, we'd leave it at that. Thanks very much for, of course, joining in, giving us a quick take on what this latest development means. So the CEA meeting that was underway, now the decision on imposing import duties on capital goods has been deferred for a later date, and the company of the management rather of Thermax, of course, expressing their disappointment at the same. And on the back of that, you can in fact see that sort of stock reaction come across the whole capital goods pack as a whole. We've got the likes of a BHEL, which has stumbled close to 3%. We've got Thermax, we've got a BGR Energy and L&T as well, that is reeling under pressure.